From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for Thunder Thursday, our extended look at Thunder basketball. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, Thunder beat writer Brett Dawson. Guys, the All-Star break is here, which means we're not halfway through. We're more than halfway through the season, Brett. And when we look at where the Thunder is this year compared to where they were a year ago, record-wise, it's practically the same. It's a little bit eerie, actually.
Basically the same team that they were last year. Now, they're a very, very different team. We know that. They've changed a whole lot. But the record, they've got one more win. They've got one more loss than they had this time last year. And so, we know that they are a differently constructed team. And I think they're a better-built team for the playoffs. I think we actually saw that last night in Memphis in a game that, look, that's not a playoff team. Yeah. They struggled to beat Memphis and put Memphis away. But at the end of the game, what happens? Paul George makes a couple of defensive plays. Carmelo Anthony makes a really big shot. Russell Westbrook makes a defensive play. They've got a team built to make plays in close games. Carmelo Anthony is a guy who can get his own shot when he has to. So I think it's a better team, but because of some of the issues we've seen them have, their defensive breakdowns, the way they played against sub-500 teams, they end up with a very similar record. Barry,
as you look at this overall picture, I mean, we've been trying to diagnose this throughout the year, why the Thunder isn't able to win more games. And now that we sort of see these numbers being so similar, when you sort of reflect on these first, whatever we are, 3 months, 4 months of the season, what do you finger as the biggest reason why they're essentially the same record as they were a year ago when it was Russell Westbrook versus the world?
Well, I mean, it's clear that they just haven't gelled. Well, it took them a long time to gel, and they're getting pretty close. It's a mystery why it took so long. The Cleveland Cavaliers seemed to gel in 5 minutes with their revamped roster. But when you join Russell Westbrook with Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, don't know why it takes so long, but apparently it does. Last year there was no gelling. You inbounded the ball to Russ, and everybody get ready. Something's going to happen. And Adams rebound or Victor catch a penetration pass or whatever it was. There wasn't a whole lot of meshing together. They just sheer force of will type of team. This one's not that way. Russ has abdicated some of that relentlessness. There's a lot of nuances to Paul George's game. Carmelo Anthony has never played as the second wheel, much less the third wheel.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of things going on. Clearly, this team, as Brett Touffet said, this is way more a well-constructed playoff team. That Carmelo Anthony shot last night, when it's a tight game, and he's well covered. It's not a great shot, but he's a shot maker. That's what he does. And in the playoffs, guess what? Almost every possession is going to be well covered. And sometimes you just got to throw it to somebody, and they got to make a play. Carmelo Anthony can do that better than most. It is a good team for the playoffs, but it's a team that will drive you batty during the regular season.
Well, that was what I was going to ask next, guys. The consternation over this team. I mean, it's run basically since the start of the season to now, not being consistent. They've had stretches where they've shown just how good they can be. They've obviously got the 2 big wins against the Warriors, the team everybody's shooting for. And when you think about, though, where fans are in terms of this season versus last year, I think everybody was so excited about Russ, about the assault on the triple-doubles record. It almost felt like people were in a better place. Fans were in a better place last year than they are this year. But I think the writing was on the wall. Russ could not carry this team through the playoffs. Should our attitude be adjusted, or is that just the way of the world, Brett, that people maybe have a little different view of this season than they did a year ago?
Well, some consternation is allowed. You mentioned that they've beaten the Warriors twice. They've also lost to the Kings and flirted with losing to the Kings again.
Yeah.
They've lost twice to Dallas. They've lost twice to the Lakers. It is fair to wonder why this hasn't worked better than it has at times. Now, one thing I would point out, I looked this up yesterday, they went 16-4 in the last 20 games that Andre Robertson played. That's a team that's finding itself, that with all its pieces is a really good team. It's not going to be that team again. It's not going to be that team again in the playoffs. It's not going to be a team that wins 16 out of 20 without Robertson. That's a key piece that they're missing. But that was starting to happen. They were starting to figure it out. I think that record would be even better if you took out the games that Andre Robertson played and Paul George didn't. So they've struggled really to figure it out. To Barry's point, I think one of the things Warriors with LeBron's situation, why Cleveland has gelled so quickly in the first 2 games, is they're still a real clear-cut alpha dog. Those guys are role players around LeBron. Here you're adding 2 guys who, Paul George is a star, Carmelo Anthony has been a star in this league. They're trying to coalesce and figure out how that works. It takes a little bit of time. But yeah, I think, you know, you need to be patient with this group and understand that it might take until playoff time for them to really click. But also, it's fair to be concerned that here comes Utah, here comes Portland. These teams below you are starting to play great. And so it's not just about catching Minnesota now. It's about holding off some of these other teams.
Barry, Brett mentions the loss of Andre Robertson, and that's going to be, we're going to continue to see that thread throughout the rest of this year, because in the playoffs, defense is such an important facet of things. Are you sensing that this team is starting to adjust to his absence, or is that still a big question mark in your mind? Still
a big question mark. I mean, and it's not what we had in mind. When you lose Andre Robertson, you think, well, who's going to stay in front of James Harden? Who's going to, you know, dog Klay Thompson? Those kinds of questions. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the three-point defense is disintegrated. They're not getting out on shooters. They're not running them off the line. They're not rotating when somebody goes in to help on the inside. And we've seen Memphis twice in the last 4 days have had like 50% shooting from three-point range. Cleveland lit up the Thunder. So the three-point defense is a major concern. If you're playing Minnesota, if you're playing San Antonio, maybe you survive. You're not surviving if you don't get out on the three-point line on Golden State and Houston. Then it's a runaway. So it's a major concern. To me, it's Billy Donovan's prime mission here in the last 2 months of this regular season. Figure out a way to defend that three-point line.
All right, guys, let's take a little bit of a big picture look back at this this part of the season before the All-Star break. I didn't say half. We've talked about that. Not half, more than half. But guys, let's do a little reflection on the Thunder thus far. As you look at wins and losses, best and worst, Brett, what do you think on the best and the worst out there for the Thunder this year?
Well, they're both in Northern California. I think winning at the Warriors is the best thing that you can do. I mean, other than if you could beat Houston when everybody was healthy, which only one team, New Orleans, has done in the game that DeMarcus Cousins got hurt, that would be something. But winning at Golden State and winning impressively at Golden State and doing that without Andre Robertson, that's clearly in my mind, their best win of the season. To me, even after all that's happened since, I still think losing at Sacramento when you led big early is clearly their worst loss.
Yeah, it looked like they might shut out the Kings in that game. Yeah. It was the Kings were struggling to even find the basket. Barry, what about you? Best and worst?
Well, I mean, a Golden State would be the best. If you want to pick something different, you know, early in the year they went to Milwaukee. Milwaukee's a good, solid team. They went to Milwaukee and just blew out the Bucks. Like, I can't remember if it was the 6th or 7th game of the year, 5th, whatever it was. But that showed you the potential of this team. They just toyed with the Bucks, did what they did to Memphis last night, only they didn't let them back in the game.
Yeah.
And that's a legitimate team with some big-time talent. And so that was an early sign that, hey, this thing could be special. Worst loss, I think I'll go with Dallas. Their December, was it 29th or 31st? Right there at the end of December. They had a good thing going. They had a nice run going. And they lose to Milwaukee when the Greek Freak steps out of bounds and not called. Yeah. And then they get beat by Dallas for no good reason. Dallas is not any good. But that Maverick game shows you, things can happen on the road. You go to Sacramento, you ought to win, but things can happen on the road. They shouldn't happen down here at Chesapeake. So that game was a major sign of the inconsistency of this team.
Yeah, and guys, to reiterate that game out in Golden State, I thought that was big. I mean, yes, it adds to the consternation because you see what's possible, and then you see games that get lost to lesser teams. But to me, to have beat Golden State here, dominated them. The starters are out for the last, 8 minutes or so of that game. White flag has been raised. Then to go out there and do it again and do it without Andre Robertson, to me, it may not be psychological yet for the Warriors, but that has to be a pretty big concern if you're the Warriors, that you could lose 2 pretty dominant games to the Thunder and lose both on the road and at home. To me, that adds to, I know that it's probably not in dispute that that's the best win, but that adds to the heft of that game in my mind.
Yeah, I think if you're the Warriors, I don't have a lot of concerns about the Warriors. They're still the best team. I still think they're the heavy favorite to win the title. I think they will win the title. The one thing that second Thunder win does, it calls into question just a little bit the notion that Golden State can just flip the switch whenever it wants to be a great team, because that's a game, having lost here, Russell Westbrook coming back in there, that's a game you really want to win if you're Golden State. They had not played well going into that game, so you know that's a win they really wanted to get, and so it does sort of run counter to this idea that they can turn it on whenever they want to.
Yeah, and I think, too, it sort of harkens back to those games last year when the Thunder just was not competitive in the least. Even when Durant was hurt, the second game here, not even a close game. All right, guys, let's look a little bit deeper into this first chunk of the season. What in you guys' mind has been the biggest disappointment about this team? Barry, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, how long it took them, maybe taking them, to develop the habits that you need. You know, we talked about playing great, before Andre Robertson's injury, the 16-4 run. You know, I'm sort of mystified why this team was 4-9 in the month of November. There's gelling, but you know that goes way beyond just not gelling. I mean, for crying out loud, they've got so much talent. When Steven Adams is your third best player, you got a heck of a team, and clearly he's their third best player. So Thunder has some flaws, but they've also, most games they wake up and the other coach says, holy crap, what are we going to do tonight? How do we deal with this? You know, how do you deal with Westbrook? How do you deal with Paul George? How do you deal with that monster running through the middle, falling out of the sky to dunk on us? And oh, by the way, if they get in trouble, they can throw the ball to Carmelo Anthony, and maybe he'll do something. So that early struggle and that 4-9 November, and just to me that's just almost inexcusable. The gelling excuse it only goes so far.
Brett, what about you?
Yeah, to me, the absolute biggest disappointment on the macro level, the big disappointment is what Paul George said the other day. They find their opponent's level. So when it's a really good team, they play up to that team's level. When it's not a very good team, they play down to that team's level. In the big picture, there is no question that's the most disappointing thing. Individually, it's been disappointing, and some of this is for reasons. There have been injuries and that sort of thing. Patrick Patterson has been a big disappointment. Just in terms of his consistency, he shot the ball really well. That's what he does. But his inability to kind of score inside, some of his inconsistent play, and that bench in general outside of Raymond Felton has been disappointing. You
know, and I was sitting here trying to think on sort of a big picture level, have I been more disappointed in offense or defense? And I think it's offense, because I really felt like that was just going to figure it out and sort of find the gel point. But man, I really thought this team was going to be more consistent defensively too. When you look at, and I know losing Robertson has been a blow, but I really thought when you looked at the perimeter defense of Westbrook with George, with Robertson, and then what Steven Adams was becoming inside, I thought that was going to be elite level defense. So I don't know if I have a clear picture of whether I think offense has been more disappointing and how it's been overall, or defense, because I really had high expectations for both, and I think both have had their moments when it's just been a really big disaster.
I think it's definitely defense that's been more disappointing, because they have sort of figured things out offensively. If you look at last night, they had struggles against Memphis in the second half, but they put up 70 points. If Paul George makes 5 3-pointers in the game they come back against Sacramento, he's going to set an NBA record for consecutive games with at least 5 3-pointers made. They've figured out a lot of stuff. Defensively, they look great at the beginning of the year when teams were still kind of finding themselves offensively, but they've been an average defense for a lot of the season, whereas of late, if you start about December 1st and go to now, they've been a really good offensive team.
All right, guys, let's talk about surprises. Let's start with players. Who's been your biggest surprise, Barry, when you think of it on an individual level?
Individual level, I'm going to say Jeremy Grant. He's really come along and become a valuable piece. He's more than a dunker, which I would not have been able to say of that when the season started offensively. They've posted him up. They've cleared out for him. He's gone one-on-one against people who sort of can't match up with him. He's not Mr. Smooth. Now, don't go thinking you're going to say, wow, this is an incredible basketball player. But he gets the job done. Everybody else, has been pleasant. That's a pleasant surprise. A disappointing surprise. I didn't know Carmelo Anthony's game had slipped as much as it has. He's still a good player, but he's not an elite basketball player anymore. He's a good hand. He can score for you in a lot of ways, but this is not anywhere close to the vintage Carmelo.
What about it, Brett?
The biggest surprise to me has been Raymond Felton, who I expected to be an upgrade as their backup point guard, but he's finished some games. He and Westbrook playing together. He's been really good off the bench. He shot the ball better than he has in about 5 years from the three-point line. To me, that's a huge benefit for them, and a big surprise just in terms of how steady he's been. He's going to have bad games. He takes some terrible shots. But for a guy at 33 to really be playing better than he has the past few years, that's been a surprise to me. I mentioned Patrick Patterson among the guys who's been kind of a disappointing surprise. I don't think we understood the depth of his knee problems. Right. And along those same lines, I expected a jump forward. Maybe not a huge leap, but a step at least for Alex Abrinas, and we've seen kind of the opposite in some ways. He's played much better the last couple of weeks, but on balance, his season is disappointing.
All right, what about big picture, guys? When you think about surprises, Brett, what springs to mind for you?
Well, I'm kind of like Barry in the sense that I didn't know Carmelo Anthony had kind of fallen off to this degree. I think I'm a little surprised at just how good they are offensively. I thought it would work with those three guys, but if you told me this is what Carmelo is, he's going to be a guy who gets you 16 points, and he can, he's going to have some really great shooting nights, but on the whole, he's not going to shoot the ball that well. I think their offense is better than I expected because I think Steven Adams has made a pretty significant jump in terms of that sort of mid-range floater he has, the little push shot that he shoots on the pick and roll. I think he's made a probably bigger strides offensively than I kind of expected, and so I think that's made them. I think on the whole, they're probably a little bit better offensive team than I thought they were going to be at this point.
What about it? Big picture, Barry. What's been the biggest surprise for you?
Big picture, I am going to say this goes back to the consistency point. How good this team is against good teams and how mediocre they are against mediocre teams. And like I said, it actually makes you feel pretty good about the postseason possibilities. I came away from that Cleveland game thinking, man, they can't guard the three-point line, but they were right there. They actually played pretty well otherwise. I mean, the offense was good. They didn't give up. LeBron got put in a bunch of situations where he's driving on Westbrook or Houston or even Abrinas, and they sort of held up in that regard. So there are things that make me think they're going to be a really good playoff team. But when you watch them play Memphis, last night and some other teams, you think, what's with this, guys? But I think they're going to be pretty well set up for the playoffs. That three-point defense is going to kill them against Houston or Golden State. I don't think they can get over those humps. But they're in pretty good shape otherwise for the playoffs. All
right, guys. Only a couple months until the playoffs are here. We've got, obviously, the All-Star break this weekend, All-Star game. Our man Eric Horn will be in L.A. for all the action there, so you want to stay tuned for everything he'll be bringing us from the left coast. And be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.